One of the things you wrote in Vanity Fair Diaries is that his bullshit had a certain authenticity. Explain that.
Well, I think that is true. I think that is his appeal. He is authentic. He's an authentic bullshitter.
What's the difference between Trump this time and Trump previously?
Far more focused now. I mean, that is what I think the scary part is.
What about Melania, notwithstanding all the memes about the hat and the border control with the hat and Trump trying to reach out to kiss her and so on?
Stone cold killer. And she's looking at the audience. I mean, it's hardly a first lady who is sort of saying, come and make, cupcakes with me.
Yeah.
It's a first lady who's saying, don't get in my way.
Is traditional or legacy media dying?
For so long, they think they can publish 20,000 word Pulitzer Prize winning pieces and they all high five each other, but actually nobody's been reading them. And that is finally sunk home.
Journalists doing journalism for other journalists?
Exactly.
You knew Trump before he was this Trump. And you sort of knew him in New York, and he was what you call an entertaining con man.
When his business began to go wrong, which it did for a period, we then switched from writing about the ebullient bullshit. Our writer, Marie Brenner, went out for dinner and she wrote the piece. And as she was having dinner, she felt something wet on her back. And she turned around and Trump had emptied a glass of wine down her back.
What? Tina Brown, you are one of the world's greatest journalists. You have edited The New Yorker, The Vanity Fair, turned them around, started The Daily Beast, and done far too many other things that we don't have time to list all of them. The question for you is traditional or legacy media dying or dead?
I think it's on its way out unless it pivots. It has to pivot. And I think we're seeing finally a sense that legacy media is beginning to try and adapt the new tricks of the trade, as it were. Because for so long, they think they can publish 20,000 word Pulitzer Prize winning pieces and they all high five each other, but actually nobody's been reading them. And that is finally sunk home. And
journalists doing journalism for other journalists?
Exactly. So, I revere that kind of investigative reporting, etc., but we have to find new ways to have the impact. It's impact that's gone away. You can write all this stuff and nobody reads it. That's the agony of it all. So we're seeing now, I think, a much greater efforts in trying to kind of emulate the sort of the shorter bites, the TikTok, breaking pieces up essentially into these other formats. And that's beginning to, I think, work much better.
But when I look at your own sort of record in journalism, you created the combination of highbrow and populist. In a way, the light and the shadows were always there, in the Vanity Fair model in particular. Today, there's a sort of denseness to the way traditional media approaches content.
I totally agree. I mean, I find it, part of me feels, they make such a meal out of making something better. Do you know what I mean? It's like the Washington Post, for instance, is going through this whole kind of massive crisis about who they should be. And I think who they should be, it's so obvious to me. It should be much more of a high-low mix. They have the Trump administration to cover. Can you imagine the topic, the fun of that? The horror of that, the fun of that. Let the news pages do what they do, but where is the great hilarious pieces about the new Trump women and the kind of the money they're spending and the tech takeovers and all the stuff that's happening? They don't know how to do the high-low. They really don't. And they're so sort of furrow-browed about it, And I think that actually British journalism is far less pretentious. I think because British journalists consider it they don't consider it a profession so much as a craft. It's always been that way. And America is really dominated by journalism schools. My husband, who was a great editor, abhorred journalism schools because he thought that they just turned out these kind of Ivy League, sort of same mindset, usually liberal, totally thinking the same way. Whereas his newspaper was full of people with odd backgrounds and someone who'd been in, come out of the army, somebody who was in, an art dealer, people who'd sort of come from all kinds of places made the paper much more alive and much more connected to the world instead of these boring, journalism school people. And I think they've wrecked American journalism.
I mean, I went to one of those journalism schools, but after I'd worked for a couple of years, and I literally learned nothing except the experience of living in New York City. Right. What I learned was outside of the J school.
Yeah. I didn't know that you'd ever gone to J school. I can't imagine Barkha Dutt at a J school.
I felt
you must
suffocated.
Have been
it was suffocating.
Yeah, interesting.
It really was suffocating because I felt like I knew more than what they were teaching me. And that I know that sounds boastful, but it was so straight-laced and, without any experimentation. The question for you is this, the White House at its first press briefing just announced that seats would be reserved for social media influencers. Before we get to all that ails traditional media, and you've spelled out some of it, there's somebody like yourself, a brilliant editor, a brilliant writer. I didn't say in my introduction that you're also the author of multiple best-selling books. Do you sometimes feel, what did I do all this for? Now some kid who's an influencer is given more importance in this age that we live in?
Well, I think it's lamentable, actually, because, I hate all of this kind of unresearched, opinionated, third-rate sort of garbage they're all spewing out and everybody's listening. It is very depressing, actually. It's depressing how influential it is. That's the issue. We have in America now Joe Rogan, who is the leading podcaster of this genre. And he is the most influential man in America. And it is an incredible thing to think of.
Would you go on his podcast?
Probably would, yes, because the fact is that it would bring me to this massive audience. That's the question. Kamala Harris, when she ran, she declined to go on his podcast, And we know the end of that story, right? Yeah. So yes, it is very vexing. But I sort of feel more that real journalists have just got to fight back by getting as good as these influencers are at having that impact and using the tools, as it were, to have that impact. The problem is that very often great journalists are not necessarily particularly telegenic. When I had a TV show, as I don't have to tell you, I thought, great, all the people who worked on The New Yorker will be on my show, it'll be fantastic. I soon realized that put them on and they couldn't do it. That you were looking for performers all the time. So in a way, it's a sort of essential thing, both in politics now and in media. You have to be able to sort of perform your stuff. And if you can't, no one is going to read it.
Politics in the age of Trump is a full performance art, and we'll get to Trump in a moment. But do you not feel uncomfortable that the media, I'm all for great storytelling, but I'm a little bit squeamish about being an actor. And I think the two are different. And, there's this whole generation of influencers who are actually, it's like theater. Yeah.
I'm very squeamish about it because I think that most of the best investigative journalists are not remotely actors. They're usually quite nerdy, sort of interior, curmudgeonly, actually. It's a sort of trait of the investigative journalists. They're so skeptical that, basically they're not sunshine and light. They're all. Yeah. And I love those people. Those are the people I've often worked with for years who do great work. They sit in their room, they just grind it out. They're not interested, actually, at all in being actors. So, it's a lamentable thing that is a
But
fact.
you adapted. You're on Substack.
Yes, actually, I have decided to start Substack 4 months ago. Mine is called Fresh Hell. Yeah. And why did I decide to do it? First of all, they badgered me and asked me. And then I thought, well, actually, I do want to be in a platform that is sort of leading edge as opposed to having a column in a legacy media newspaper, which I could have done. And I'm finding it actually quite exhilarating because of the direct, unmediated sort of relationship. But the first week or two I started writing it, I felt like I was swimming naked. You are self-publishing. I'm used to sending a piece in, having
it edited,
responded to, back and forth.
Playback.
So actually, of course, what I immediately did was then spend all the earnings I was making on Substack by hiring an editor, having a lawyer. I gave myself those things because I wouldn't write without an editor looking at it. I just wouldn't. I wouldn't trust myself. And let alone not have a legal read. I've never done anything without a legal read.
Yeah.
So I want those things, but it is a strange feeling to realize that you're just sort of putting yourself out there, without any of that protective covering. So, I mean, I was nervous at first, and I thought, this is really not going to be for me at all. But actually, since then, it's quite exciting to see the spike of readers and really know who they are. I mean, they send their emails. There are all these people out there who I don't know, who suddenly are these readers. Yeah. And, we have these reader chats now, and they're very smart, really very smart people. So I'm starting to kind of enjoy that, actually.
Yeah. I mean, I always say, look, technology is going to change whether or not we accompany it for the ride. And if we don't master it, it's going to master us. Right. So there's no point lamenting.
There's no point in lamenting. Exactly. This is where the action really is now,
Absolutely.
So, and you can build a very big audience like that. But the problem is it's the siloed nature of things that I do find, that's the only thing I truly regret, which is that, you can have 150,000 people reading you, but
the newsroom is dead.
The newsroom
you're alone.
You're alone. Yeah. And also, are there the 150,000 people that are talking to one another? There used to be a thing where, I mean, it is still true. Like in the summer, I wrote a piece about my son, who is has developmental delays and Asperger's. I wrote about him in the New York Times, and gotta say, the response was so overwhelmingly huge. It reminded me of just, there is that legacy media impact thing that you can't really get in all these different.
So there is scale. Legacy media has scale. Yeah. It's just that it doesn't use that scale to effect. No, I would say,
and also has an audience that is. It's too in its bubble. It truly doesn't cross over.
Navel gazing.
Yeah, it just doesn't cross over. The audience is so huge, but it doesn't include all these other people. And it means that if you only are reading the New York Times, you truly don't really know what's going on. And this is, of course, first became apparent when Trump won.
Yeah.
When everybody who read the New York Times was utterly, utterly sure it was going to be Hillary, because they only read the New York Times, really, essentially.
Yeah. So Trump just called Jim Acosta of CNN a big loser and said it was great news that he was leaving the network. This after the network pushed him to the graveyard shift of midnight. So I think Acosta had no choice but to leave. What's happening with promoters in the US media? For us in India, we used to, I mean, there are many things to criticize in the United States of America, but I genuinely used to believe that it's the freest country in the world. And to see promoters, owners being able to dictate in a way policy in the way that has happened since Trump became president is really quite startling. I mean, clearly Acosta has been buried because Trump hates him.
That's right. It's stunning. I mean, I think all of us are really shocked by it. I mean, the biggest example is Jeff Bezos, right? I mean, he bought the Washington Post. It was a rounding error in terms of the money he was putting out, but it was thrilling that somebody in the tech world, and everybody thought, hooray, somebody who's got a big tech brain and a big tech fortune is buying the Washington Post. He'll bring all of that to this great newspaper. And for the first 5 years, he was really an exemplary owner. But now in Trump's second term, I mean, basically, he's gone all in Trump. And the whole atmosphere's changed. He famously killed the endorsement piece they were going to run.
Well, he argued that a paper shouldn't be endorsing candidates.
Yes, he did argue that, but unfortunately he argued it sort of on the eve of the election. I mean, he didn't say, if he'd done it 6 months before and said, we've got a new policy, nobody would have said anything. But it was so obvious that it was like they all suddenly panicked and they realized that Trump was going to win. They didn't want to be there anymore. And the owner of the LA Times did the same thing. The owner of the LA Times, who actually is he's in the medical, has a medical fortune in the tech, biotech business. I mean, today he just endorsed, Bobby Kennedy, who is, anti-vaccines. And it's extraordinary. I mean, this is a man who actually has manufactured vaccines, and he has just endorsed Bobby Kennedy Jr.
And Zuckerberg reversed 5 years of Meta/Facebook policy just to be in with Trump.
Exactly right. He basically he went to Mar-a-Lago. He had lunch with Trump. The next day, he killed the fact-checking aspect of Meta, which actually was a bit of a joke anyway, because it was all pretense. It's just a pretense and a shill. But he killed it. And, I mean, he also, got rid of his whole DEI department instantly. I mean, it was just instant. It's as if they've taken some kind of it's like a virus. I mean, they've just decided they're going to go all in. And
what are they scared of? What are they scared of?
Well, I mean, the fact is that they all have business with the government. They all do. I mean, with the case of Jeff Bezos, with his, Blue Origin space thing that he has, he needs, government, NASA, he needs all these things.
Yeah.
And in the last go-round, Amazon did lose a big contract with the Defense Department, which was Trump's retaliation to the Washington Post. And this time he's decided, I don't want to do that anymore. And so he isn't. He's going all in, and the paper is supposed to go all in too.
And it's Semaphore reported that the Washington Post, where I have been writing for 7 years, has lost numbers in the millions.
Yes.
In the millions. Like something like a fall from 22 million users every day to 2 million. Like that,
no, in
that drastic.
That's what was so extraordinary, was that when they made this decision to kill the endorsement, I think that they just thought, well, so what? Nobody cares, right? But in a way, it was kind of rather inspiring that readers just totally cancelled the Washington Post. I mean, they did care. They cared very much. And their attempts to now sort of grow their subscription base has been catastrophically undermined. I mean, they've lost all the people that they had spent years trying to grow.
But what does that tell us about partisanship? You see, today, as media practitioners, we are under enormous pressure to make ourselves relevant in an age fueled by tribalism, partisanship, opinion. Everything that we were schooled at, facts first, don't wear your opinion on your sleeve in a news report, don't let people be able to look at your content and see who you vote for. This is how I was taught journalism, even, in all the places I worked at. Today, all of that has been turned on its head. How does a journalist, a storyteller, a content creator, an author, a writer navigate the pressure to be partisan?
I mean, half of it is about this is really why these Substacks and so on are important. Because really, you can only be as brave as you're allowed to be, right? I mean, if you're writing, if the corporates over you and who own you, are not allowing this kind of content that's real, how can you publish?
Yeah.
I mean, it's really hard. I mean, you can't go off and publish it on your own. You have to, your network or your newspaper is saying, like, we don't want that. Absolutely. And they let you go.
Yeah.
So it is extremely difficult. But at the same time, I mean, I am enormously inspired still by journalists. I've started, my husband, when he died, I started a foundation for him, for his legacy in journalism, called the Sir Harry Evans Investigative Journalism Fund, where we give a scholarship to a young investigative journalist. And I put on this convening once a year with great journalists who come in. And what is actually inspiring is, I mean, we had like nearly 1,000 applicants for the one, journalism spot, because the winner gets to work at Reuters. Such brilliant work is being done. And I'm looking at these things and I'm thinking, these are kids doing these really sort of rigorous investigations, usually on a few non-profit dollars that they've scratched together.
Yeah.
They're in their own apartments. They're in no newsroom of any kind. They're longing for newsrooms. One of the reasons that they apply is because the thought of working in a Reuters newsroom for them is total heaven. They have no one to mentor them, nothing. But they're still doing incredibly brave things. And then these foreign reporters who they go off to report, in the Middle East and in Ukraine without any sort of backing of big big media. And sadly, a lot of them get killed too because they don't have that sort of security support. But they're still going. It's almost like, journalists, it is a vocation, actually. It's a passion profession even now. It's a passion profession, and it's still, that passion hasn't been killed. And there's a lot of idealism still there.
But there is an elitism that we need to acknowledge and own, at least in people like us. Because, I was thinking of a young reporter whose body was found in a tank in a small town of Chhattisgarh, an Indian state. And he had been reporting on corruption in the building of roads. And literally, his body was found. He'd been tortured, killed. And now he's a small town guy, right? He's a small town guy with no organizational backing and has no sort of elite privilege that we, even with all of our challenges, continue to have.
Yes.
So there is this elitism in the media as well, right?
Right. Well, I agree. And I think, one of the things I try to do with this foundation is to find people like that kid, and say, support them at least for a year. and help them get ahead, because it is a vocation and they do these immensely brave things. And a lot of what they're doing is corruption is a massive topic.
Yeah.
I mean, in the people who submit, many of them have been reporting on corruption. There's a lot of very interesting networks forming, though, that are the sort of new way of doing investigative journalism. Collaboration and alliances.
But is all this going to survive in the age of Trump? I mean, he's basically, for instance, stopped funding all over the world. This has impacted the IPI, the International Press Institute. I'm a member of the executive board, and we got emails yesterday saying that the Africa program is actually going to shut down because it's an immediate hit.
Really?
It's an immediate hit. So we have to wait and see how the Trump presidency sort of evolves. But I want to ask you about Trump, because in Vanity Fair diaries, you have this this brilliant graph, this brilliant sort of clutch of sentences where because you knew Trump before he was this Trump, and you sort of knew him in New York, and he was what you call an entertaining con man.
That's right.
You, in a way, saw what was coming because you actually write that the American public like this.
That's right. I did. I read the manuscript of his book, The Art of the Deal, when it was just this business guy who'd written a book. And I bought it for Vanity Fair to extract it because I loved the voice of the book. I thought it was hilarious. And I just thought it was all, I said, I think it's bullshit, but it's entertaining bullshit and people are going to love it. And that's exactly right. He was, in those days, a much more sort of ebullient, sort of funny Barnum and Bailey guy. I mean, a real sort of New York character, such as we're used to. Outrageous. I mean, he used an expression, which is good actually, where he said he thinks that people like hyperbole. He said about sort of fake hyperbole. They like to think there's something bigger out there to aspire to, even though they know that it isn't really true. So he understood that.
The acting quotient.
The acting quotient and the idea of thinking big. We can all be huge, but actually, of course, we can't all be huge. But it's a fantasy that people like, particularly Americans. So he was an entertaining character in those days, and
a likable one. One of the things you wrote in Vanity Fair diaries is that his bullshit had a certain authenticity. Explain that.
Well, I think that is true. I think Trump that is his appeal. He is authentic. He's an authentic bullshitter, if there is such a thing,
Yeah.
But he was much
What's
lighter.
An authentic bullshitter? Like, that sounds like an oxymoron.
I know, well, it is an oxymoron. That's what his appeal is, essentially. Is like, he sort of he half believes it. And he
wings the rest.
And he wings the rest.
Yeah.
And the rest of it he just hopes might come true, or he'll pretend he didn't say it. It's all the same thing. But he got a lot darker as time went by. And as a matter of fact, I think it really sort of started with the end of his marriage to Ivana, the first wife. Ivana was actually rather been written out of the Trump story, but I think she was actually a huge help to Trump. She sort of brought him into sort of New York society. When I first met Trump, it was at a lunch or a dinner, I think it was, that Ivana had given. She was the one who was interested in getting into society and sort of bringing him in. Once she'd gone, that was the end. You never saw Trump in society ever again. He was not sort of accepted, if you like, in the sort of echelons of the Wall Street, the big passions of Wall Street. He was considered vulgar. He was a man from Queens. Nobody cared at all, which is part of his, great resentment. I've often thought that, that sort of social chip on the shoulder is one of the most powering kind of motivations that people can have in their lives. Like, I'm going to show you, that I'm worthy of the same kind of obeisance that you guys get. Yeah. So he got, when his business began to go wrong, which it did for a period, we then switched from writing about the sort of ebullient bullshitter to writing about the guy whose business was a fiasco. He got very, very angry with me about that.
Did he? What did he say to you?
Well, what happened is that our writer, Marie Brenner, went out for a dinner and she wrote the piece. And as she was having dinner, she felt something wet on her back. And she turned around and Trump had emptied a glass of wine down her back.
What?
Yeah, he emptied a glass of wine down her back.
And how did she react?
Well, she turned around and she couldn't believe it. She just went, and then she saw Trump and he looked back and just went, at her.
I'm laughing because I don't know how to react, but it's so outrageous.
It's so outrageous. I know. So that's, how he felt about it. And he blamed me, of course, as the editor. And then you started to refer to me as the losing fool, Tina Everybody's like, no Twitter in those days, but he said it all the time to Page 6. I then commissioned another piece about him in the New Yorker where, he fell for me twice. I persuaded him to do this piece with someone else. And
is this the Mark Singer profile?
yes.
So it had a line saying that Trump was unmolested by a soul, if I remember this correctly.
Yes.
I mean, what a line.
What a line. But the other great line that it had, which I'll never forget, was he said to Mark Singer, "This is off the record, but you can use it." Which is sort of his philosophy. He was so furious. I mean, he left a voicemail that was like 25 minutes long, saying, this is like, he's a liar, I'm going to go up, with total fury. But then, never thought about Trump again for out the next sort of 15 years, essentially. And the last time that I saw him when in the new phase was in the sort of 2016 or 15 White House Correspondents' dinner.
Yeah.
Big occasion when, the president always comes and the journalists always come. Obama was at the podium as president and did a brilliant roast of Trump, essentially.
Yeah.
Because that was at the point when Trump kept saying that Obama wasn't born in America, if you remember. The whole birther, as it was called, smear. And he just took Trump apart. And it was even more sort of effective, frankly, because the next day he announced that they'd killed Osama bin Laden. So it was like Obama was at his most high. And I was sitting behind Trump, who was the guest at the Washington Post table. And during this roast, I could see the usual flesh color of his neck turn absolutely crimson. I mean, he
was fuming.
He was fuming. And I am told, that he could hardly control himself from sort of getting up and just hurling and screaming.
I think you wrote that that's when he decided to run.
Yeah. I truly believe that was the rosebud moment for him when he looked around this room, laughing liberals. I mean, it was the whole press corps there, the people that he hates the most, really all of them Democrats. I mean, and he just thought his deep hatred for the liberal, sort of the liberal intelligentsia, essentially, I think, was sort of consolidated, in that moment.
What is the lesson for liberals in Trump's second win? You see, the first time you could have written it off as an aberration, a black swan moment. You can't do that the second time around.
I really believe that there is a lot of authenticity to Trump and there is a lot of connection to Trump. And I truly believe that the sort of intelligentsia of the sort of mainstream media, which still really runs the show, just doesn't understand what Americans feel and think. And there's no doubt that the left went much lefter than America wanted to go. I mean, when you consider, in a sense, for decades and decades, America didn't want gay marriage. Then it happened very quickly. And actually, hand it to America, they embrace gay marriage. It is now just part of our world in a way that people who are in their 20s just can't imagine that, in the Clinton era.
This was a fight.
It was a total fight and that you couldn't be. So that was great. But at the same time, it then went I think that the transgender movement was overly sort of promoted, essentially. I mean, it was excellent to have the transgender movement start, but it became such a kind of, it took up so much space in the public discourse.
Yeah.
And, the whole kind of the DEI thing that he's now collapsed took up just far too much space in people's lives. I mean, they began to feel they couldn't.
Regimented, basically.
It was so regimented. People felt all the time there were things they weren't allowed to say, there were things they weren't allowed to do, that everything that they were was looked down on, that they were, they were not being considered for jobs because they were just regular white people. All of these things took hold. Also,
the propensity of the left to be superior, act superior, and look down on anybody who thinks differently.
That's right. That totally so. Interestingly, Nancy Pelosi's daughter, Alexandra, is a very good documentarian. And she did a wonderful movie about the January the 6th, actually. And, at the end of the film, you feel kind of very empathetic towards these men, actually, because they do feel unconsidered, sort of
overlooked,
just the people who didn't have a role anymore. They felt very threatened by women, of course. they turn women, people are wearing T-shirts saying things like the future is female, you know, and they're thinking like, yeah, I know. And where am I? I'm sitting in a bar, you know, nothing happening for me. So there was a lot of that was being sort of overlooked. And actually, Wes Moore said something, Maryland governor said something very interesting in the summer at a festival I was at. He said, you know, we have to be careful that black girl magic doesn't become black man tragic.
All right.
And it was sort of a bit like that. I mean, the push, which was so overdue, frankly, for women to have equity, you know, meant that then the men felt, now, you know, frankly, you could think, well, for thousands of years, you've had it your way, so get over it, you know?
Yeah, but the entire debate around the transgender issue has also erased, in many ways, the fight that women have fought, right? And that is a fault line that no one talks about. And you have Martina Navratilova, hardly a Trump fan, J.K. Rowling, hardly a right-winger, today being vilified just for sort of daring to say that this has gone too far.
Well, there's been a huge amount of censoring of people's ideas. And that has been the other thing that people feel very strongly about. I mean, I know multiple people who just feel, no, I'm not going to be on social media. I'm not going to write that essay I would normally have written. I'm not going to make that speech I would have made.
Self-censorship.
Because I will not be cancelled. And the cancelling became, in America, very, very scary. I mean, there was a Stasi-like feeling to it. So all of those things, I think, added to the sort of prepare the ground for Trump. Unfortunately, I mean, Trump is just so brutal and so crudely vicious, essentially, about the way
What's the difference between Trump this time and Trump previously?
Far more focused now. I mean, that is what I think the scary part is. In fact, I mean, I would now argue, sort of perhaps controversially, that the worst thing that happened was that Joe Biden won the first time.
Oh, really?
Because just think, we'd be at the end of a Trump 8 years right now, instead of the beginning of his next one. He probably would have flamed out, you know, because first term was so chaotic, so badly done. There's no doubt that it would have flamed out. We would not have had January the 6th, nor the, quote, big lie, where he spent 4 years persuading everybody to not trust the government, not trust anything they read because the election was rigged. We wouldn't have had any of that, actually. We would have just lurched through a chaotic, messy, badly put together Trump term. Unfortunately, what happened next was that the Biden administration actually spent all of their time trying to knock Trump out of the race by court cases, essentially. It would have been much better if they'd been spending their time figuring out what America was thinking and being connected to Americans, than all of the energy that went into sort of trying to make Trump unrunnable. And he won. And each time he won, he was a bigger, you know, he became a martyr. So it was a disaster, actually. The democratic sort of, response to the ongoing presence of Trump was actually a disaster. And now that he actually spent 4 years figuring it out. I mean, he has spent his exile, you know, his 4 years in Elba, if you like. He surrounded himself with far more organized people who have really figured out what they're going to do on day one.
And he's done it.
And he has said it. But they're so much more focused. I mean, his chief of staff, Susie Wiles, is a sort of cool killer who knows how to keep everybody in line instead of the kind of multiple. I mean, I will be...
Where do you see Elon Musk in this equation?
And Elon Musk is a very interesting part of the equation because he came in late. You know, I mean, he only came in really in July. And, you know, we mustn't forget the impact of Trump's assassination attempt. I mean, people were very admiring of the way Trump handled that. And it was brave. I mean, his response was very brave, you know, and resistant. And, you know, it again added to his legend. And it was like the day of the assassination attempt, Elon Musk, who is so much about like Iron Man and being tough, and he just fell in love with Trump. He tweeted out like, this man, something like, you know, this man's a hero, he should be president or something. And from that moment, he sort of got behind Trump. And his wealth is just so massive, you know, that it really made a difference.
But one reads reports that Susie Wiles will prevent Elon from having direct access to Trump.
Well, now what we have, which I think is fascinating, is sort of a split in MAGA. Because, you know, when you look at the who was on the dais at the inauguration, right? It was a base camp for billionaires, and the base locked out. Right? I mean, on the dais was $1 trillion.
Yeah.
Bezos, Zuckerberg, Musk. I mean, it was unbelievable. The schlubs who voted for him, all those guys who
were out at a different hall.
The ones with the ponytails and tattoos, and who had got Trump to this point, was sitting in an auditorium watching it on a screen, and they were truly sort of bummed out by it.
Yeah.
Then you had Vivek Ramaswamy, who is this other
character,
fortune, tweeting away about how HR-1 visas were essentially because Americans just were sort of addicted to kind of crappy entertainment and were not students like people who come from overseas. I mean, and I'm reading this tweet and I'm thinking, why are you tweeting like this? You're talking about MAGA here.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like you're describing the base.
Yeah.
And of course, sure enough,
he was shafted.
He was gone. That was the end of him.
Yeah.
Because Steve Bannon, who represents, the old style, he's the kind of unreconstructed sort of Luddite base, if you like.
Yeah.
I mean, they just went nuts because essentially that was what they said. You want to lose your base? I mean, these are the people who don't want people to have these visas.
Yeah.
They don't want them. They want to give them to Americans. So now you do have a split. And I think Trump will, keep, he loves the sort of the cool factor and the massive money that goes with the tech people. I mean, being embraced by them for him has done massive things for his cool factor with young men. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, Senator John Fetterman, he's an interesting figure actually in Pennsylvania.
He who came in a hoodie.
The one who always wears
shorts. Yeah.
I mean, his sartorial choices I find I'm over them, frankly. But he, when the Pennsylvania rallies were going on and everybody said it was the key swing state and Kamala was doing rally after rally and Trump, but, her sort of supporters of when she got Beyonce, everybody said, that's done. It's a wrap. Taylor Swift, it's a wrap, Yeah. No, I mean, the fact is for young men, Elon Musk is it. He's Iron Man. He's Rocket Man. He is the dude, who wants to send people to Mars.
Yeah.
It is so much more exciting to them. And Trump saw that, and I think that Elon coming in gave him this huge kind of push with young men.
But will that relationship last, you think?
I think in the end it won't, because, Trump's so combustible. Elon really is, you could say, certainly an equal, if not even more of a star than Trump.
Yeah.
The other tech guys, are obviously very competitive with him.
Yeah.
And the MAGA base, like the thinkers of the MAGA base, like Bannon, hate him. So I think there's going to be real sparks with Elon Musk. Actually.
What did you think when you watched the Carter Memorial and you saw Obama and Trump sitting together chuckling? There was a lot that was read into that, as was Michelle Obama's absence, which has led to speculation about an imminent divorce. Meghan Kelly has called it a political earthquake. Does anybody know what's going on?
It was surprising she didn't come to Carter, I will say. It was very surprising.
Yeah.
I understand why she didn't come to the inauguration.
Yes.
She has made no bones of the fact, like not going there, not doing it, sick of it all. Don't know why she wasn't at Carter. I think we all have to be careful when someone doesn't appear. Is there an issue of health or, what is the real reason? I thought that Obama did, though, look oddly alone walking into the inauguration, and you suddenly realize what an impact having Michelle with him makes when he walks into a room.
Yeah.
I think that Michelle is very much, she's such an enormous star in her own right.
Yeah.
I'm sure she's very bored with Barack writing his second volume of his book, which has now been 4 years. I can imagine Michelle saying, listen, Buster, I got mine done in a year and a half. Sit down, finish it. I'm sick of this,
Yeah.
So I think there is some tension probably going on with things. And she hates Washington,
Yeah.
So, but it was an interesting front row. And it was so symbolic to have this person, being celebrated who was so much the opposite of everything that Trump believes. I mean, Trump really believes that virtue is for suckers. I mean, he really does, and makes no bones of it. Virtue is for suckers, and about Carter, like he thought he would be the lowest on the totem pole as far as Trump was concerned.
Who do you think Trump might admire among his opponents?
I don't.
Grudgingly?
The people who might concern him if they ran. I think he was a little bit concerned when Mark Cuban looked like he might make a run.
Right.
I mean, successful TV show with the Shark Tank. I don't know whether you have that in India.
Yeah, we do. We have an Indian version of
very
it.
Very smart. I think he would have been quite a threatening figure to Trump. I think there's nobody currently, I think, out there that particularly threatens Trump right now. But, the fact is that after 2 years, he will be a lame duck, unless he finds a way to get a third term, which I would not be at all surprised.
I mean, he could change the rules, right?
Well, at the moment, he's changing all the rules. So, it could happen. I think a bigger question is, how will the Vance, the J.D. Vance relationship survive? I mean, because I think Donald Trump Jr. in the end is going to regret bringing Vance into the mix.
Because?
Because I think there's always going to be a dynastic fantasy, right, of a son, that Don Jr. is the heir to MAGA, not J.D. Vance.
Well, at the moment, the star is barren.
The star is barren. The interesting thing about barren is that for all of these years, people have sort of sniggered again, this dreaded, deracinated elite that we talk about. It's like, well, of course, apparently, Barron Trump is, he's got real issues and learning disabilities and all this stuff. And actually, I was told that by somebody who is close to the head of the business school where he is that his boards, his applications were actually off the charts, that he was academically brilliant. Now, it could well be that Barron is an awkward, might even have an on the spectrum aspect, but that he's actually very smart. Yeah. And it's quite amazing. And Trump never refers to him, embraces him. He never sort of brings him up on nothing. I mean, all of a sudden he's doing that, you know. And Barron is going to be the star of this next 4 years. People are going to really, and he's 6'9". I mean, it's.
What about Melania? I know you wrote a little bit about it on your Substack, but what about Melania, notwithstanding all the memes about the hat and the border control with the hat and Trump trying to reach out to kiss her and so on? She seems much more self-assured as well this time around.
Oh, I think she is the commandant here. I think that Melania is in a deadly focused mood. I think she's in exactly the same place that Trump is, And I think that they're much more of a peace than people realize, I mean, I think she's stone cold killer, Melania Trump, I think, and I think that her new official picture is so revealing because she's in this incredibly, I mean, she's gorgeous, let's face it, this fabulously sort of mannish tux, jacket, and she's looking at the order. I mean, it's hardly a first lady who is sort of saying, come and make, cupcakes with me. Yeah. It's a first lady who's saying, don't get in my way, And I think she's going to have a much more focused second term because, for one thing, Ivanka's out of the way. Now, Ivanka and Melania hate each other, and Ivanka was sort of like a rival first lady, first term. She was, she was the one who everybody wanted to cover. She's gorgeous. She was in the White House. She was considered the one who could slightly temper her father, blah, blah. She's out of that now. Now her husband is wildly rich. All the leveraging they did of the relationships, with the Saudis has paid off 1 million times. And he has a huge, fund from the Saudis. Lives in Miami, pals around with Jeff Bezos' wife. She's really into now the sort of billionaire, blonde scene, and is kind of bored with the sordidness of Washington. Actually, doesn't really need it because she's, and didn't like being attacked all the time. Didn't like losing her friends because her friends were really the sort of the New York liberal, the sort of what I think of as the Tory Birch world. That was her world, and it all had to be lost. And I think she hated that, actually. I mean, as anybody would. And that means that the White House path is clear for Melania. So Melania, I think, is going to rise, and because she had a lot of mockery to deal with.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it must cause a lot of rage. She was never on the cover of Vogue. I mean, when you consider the fact that she is by far the best-looking First Lady we've ever had, right? But she was never on the cover of Vogue, whereas Jill Biden was on the cover of Vogue twice. So that's the stuff that would just rankle the soul, to go back to what we were saying before about the sort of the things that really people, those small, infuriating things. And I think she's going to be much more present. And I don't know how, but I think she will be, actually. So we have a kind of quite a formidable lineup when you think about it. You've got, a newly empowered Melania. You have a new star to make the plot line more exciting, which is Barron. You have all of the blondes around, all of the boys, the kind of...
Yeah.
I mean, Don Jr. has jettisoned the dreadful Kimberly Guilfoyle in favor. He's upgraded to this kind of good-looking, interesting socialite, this girl he's dating at the moment. Lara Trump is a very accomplished woman, actually. It turns out, I mean, they're surprising, the Trumps, really, because the kind of arm candy women in the family, they're actually all pretty good at what they do. I mean, Lara, who was married to Eric Trump, I mean, she became co-chair of the fundraising. She did an amazingly good job, I mean, everyone's niggered at that. But no, she was actually very effective. And then, I mean, we had her at our Washington Post Women's Summit and talking about how she wanted to run for governor of Florida. And I swear, she was as good as anybody you see. I mean, she was excellent, as a matter of fact. I mean, whether she'd be any good as governor of Florida, I don't know. But she can certainly come across as a woman of accomplishment. It's amazing, essentially. And then, he puts in this new 27-year-old press secretary, again, much sniggering. She gave her first press. I mean, I thought she was, a lot of what she was delivering was kind of heinous and ridiculous.
But she was there, confident.
Well, she was a very confident performer. I mean, much more so, I thought, than the last couple of press secretaries for Biden. So it's just like, he has an odd talent, really, for sort of finding these people. And they're pretty good in front of the camera, which is obviously his only
criteria.
But I kind of get it, because this is the issue, right, that we were talking about. It's like, you have to be good in front of the camera.
Yeah.
And he certainly knows how to do that. I mean, there's no one around Trump who's not good on camera now.
Yeah, interesting. Let's end with the characters that popped up during the LA wildfires that have been at least partly the subject of one of your books, Harry and Meghan.
Yes, indeed.
So Harry has just scored a big apology from the tabloids in the United Kingdom. But the hate directed towards Meghan Markle doesn't stop, not even when they're out there saying that they're volunteering and helping the victims. On a parallel track, Kate Middleton has fought her cancer and she's back, and suddenly they're the couple that can do no wrong. And in this entire conversation that we have about pushback against the elites, that doesn't seem to apply in the British context in quite the same way. So how do you make sense of the seeming contradiction?
I will say for Harry, I mean, look, he's made every mistake in the book in terms of how he managed the exit from the royal family. But his taking on the war with the tabloids, proving that they phone hacked and stalked and surveyed him, and refusing to back down, for 4 or 5 years. I mean, people took all these payoffs and he stayed. He was the last man standing. I consider that very brave, actually. Yeah. And the fact is that he paid a price. Yeah. And the price he paid was the hatred and vilification of the tabloid press, because even though it was directed at the Murdoch press, who are sort of, the worst of the worst, nonetheless, other tabloids hacked and did the same thing. So they all felt there was a confederacy there of sort of us against him. So he paid a huge and heavy price, actually. And I think a lot of the hatred against them was directed by that. Meghan has just become like this blood sport. To the point that, I think that Meghan has a talent for getting it all wrong. She really does. Every move she's made she has no judgment, unfortunately. But, the hatred directed to her is completely out of proportion. Yeah. And I don't know how she fixes it.
Why do you think it is, though?
It's just, because the press, essentially, it's a wolf pack. And the binary fun of the sort of perfect, you can do no wrong Wales is in England, and the two who sort of spurned England. I mean, the British press do feel dissed by the two of them. And I mean, Meghan whined and told a lot of untruths, for instance, on on Oprah. So she's brought a lot of it on herself. She doesn't seem to be able to fix it, is her issue. I mean, I think that Harry can fix it, actually. And I think is starting to, essentially, because he is authentic, Harry. Harry does have a brand. I mean, for 10 years in the army, he's got a natural talent. He's Diana's son. You can't take it away from him. And I think he's actually the most talented performer in the royal family. So even though they trash Harry, Harry could come back, essentially. But Meghan just seems to, I think because she's just so desirous of such meretricious things, and it just comes across, it's just like, just chill. We don't need your cooking show. You know what I mean?
My God,
we just don't need it. We don't need anything that you're, and she sort of always makes a mess of it too, in a strange way. I mean, now she's delayed her cooking show. Now she's delayed the launch of her lifestyle brand. There's always drama around it, So unfortunately, I think a lot of things people say about Meghan may well be true. I think she's really difficult to work with. I think she's, there's always drama all the time. So it's sort of tragic for Harry in a way, because I sort of think Harry could actually come back. But I think he's still very enamored of Meghan.
All for love.
It's not going to happen. All for love. Exactly right.
In the end, what's the next book?
I think I am going to do a proper memoir.
I was saying before you get to the memoir, you need to do a Trump book.
I have thought about that, actually, but there's so many, it's just hard to know where, which way you would alight. But it's pretty extraordinary, the story.
Yeah.
It gets on, I mean, maybe the story is sort of his exile to now, to now. I mean, obviously the exile.
I think there's a story there.
Yeah, well, there's definitely a story. I mean, but there's also 1,000 books, so I'm not sure I could stand it.
Well, your own journey is no less extraordinary, so I'm looking forward to the memoir. Thank you, Tina. It's always a pleasure.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barkha.